And we are recording with Mr. Jeff Nyquist on Friday, April 28th, 2 and 9 p.m. Friday, April 28th, 2023 at 2 and 9 p.m. Eastern time. If anybody wonders why I ever say the full date like that, it's because very quickly time passes and you listen to an episode and you're like, April when? April, that makes it, especially in the last 3 years, that makes a huge difference. What are you talking about? Are you talking about bioweapon safety in July 2019 or July 2020? Are you discussing Ukraine in 2021 or 2023? Very, very massive differences in dates and their implications. So that's why I do that. If you guys want to support the podcast, please click on that little red button. If you're watching on locals, you should be. That's or if you're watching on Rumble, that's locals. Click on that red button, support the podcast, use promo code Tommy, or you can go to the description and get the merch. Those are all my own custom designs. But Mr. Nyquist has been on here several times before. He has the patience of a saint, and I rescheduled today because I'm a bad person and a bad host. And we were both remarking on how beautiful and sunny and springy it is. And well, we can't get too lost in the clouds and we can't love God's perfect creation too much. So we're going to instead talk about war, destruction, genocide, famine, impending World War III. And with that unholy introduction, Mr. Nyquist, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. The world is not doing so well,
No.
and so we're kind of lucky to be in the United States and not in Eastern Europe right now. The Ukraine war, which is, it's getting crazy. There's two dimensions to this war. There's the information side of the war, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the kinetic side of the war, of course. And people, I'm in despair over how easily manipulated people are, both on the right and the left, when it comes to war. They're too busy living their lives. I guess it's not their fault, and they haven't really studied the subject and the background that is needed. So what we have is we have a lot of people throwing around facts that are not properly analyzed, and those facts are taken for some kind of deeper meaning or understanding when they're not. Because you take any fact, well, how do you understand it? That's not an easy question.
Hmm.
So with a war, it's so complicated. You have all kinds of layers of fact. You have, well, there's one thing in Ukraine war, casualties. We don't know. This is a war where we don't know how many people are actually being killed. We don't. We have disinformation being leaked, both from the Russian side, the American side, the Ukrainian side, and it's look, there's some, but there are rules of thumb that we know. They can count burned out vehicles from space.
Mm-hmm.
They know how many tanks were destroyed. They can count them. So let's talk about let's do an overview. Start at the beginning, because people are saying April of 2023. How did we get here? The war started on the 24th of February, 2022, last year. So we're, more than 14 months into this war. Now, as of today, it's the 28th of April today, as you said. So the Russian plan, we understand this now. It's pretty clear. The Russian plan for invading Ukraine was to go after Kiev. They were planning to kill, they had a death list. They were going to kill 30 top people in the Ukrainian government, including President Zelensky. They're going to eliminate, decapitate the government, put in a puppet government that was controlled from Moscow. And then they were going to say they fixed Ukraine and that
Sound,
it's all
sound,
good.
sound familiar?
That's what the Russians were planning to do in Ukraine. And of course, they had a really good chance to succeed. They sent in almost 200,000 troops. They came in. They came in. They hoped that they kept denying they were going to invade. Remember, right up to the end. It's just military maneuvers.
And we did that as well. Our intelligence agency said that as well. Sorry, resizing the screen. Our intelligence agency said that as well, right? They're building up tons and thousands of tons of armament, but there's no reason to believe they're going to invade.
Well, I
All
think
right.
with Iraq, when we did that to both Gulf Wars, I think it was, well, we didn't really invade Iraq in the first Gulf War, but I think it was pretty clear. I knew we were going to invade Iraq just from reading in the newspapers and reading books about what was going on in the administration at the time. I knew in December December of
2002
2002, 2002, because they invaded in,
in
what was it, March of
March 03.
2003.
Yeah.
I knew that then. It was pretty clear. Anybody who knew how to read events could tell
How,
that was going to happen.
hold on, let's put a timeout on Ukraine. How did you know that with such certainty? And I'm not grilling you. I love reading and I love looking at, and the more
Bob
I read
Woodward,
it.
yeah, Bob Woodward did a book on Bush at War. I think it was
Okay.
the first volume. He wrote a whole bunch of volumes. They were really very good, um, because he talked to people in the administration, like Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, and he got a complete picture of what President Bush was thinking and what his thinking was after 9/11, and then the war in Afghanistan started, like I think that was early October of 2001. They went right after Al Qaeda, right near the beginning. So that had already started. But then the Iraq part of it. And of course, so I immediately I was reading everything I could get that had good, solid information on what was going on in the administration, because it's really the what the people say, the nuances of what they're saying
Hmm.
that tells you. And it was kind of Lisa Rice was a national security advisor who she had scorn for dictators and the bad guys, so to speak. And President Bush had a sort of this very simple notion that there's these bad guys and we need to get them. Remember, you're
Yeah.
either with us or against us.
Yeah.
What I didn't know, it took me years to learn, that I learned this from a former CIA official, which kind of surprised me that I hadn't figured it out. There was a connection between the 9/11 hijackers in Iran, not Iraq. Some of
Oh,
them had gone through some training in Iran, and this was, what was the name of the journalist wrote an actual book about it, and Timmerman. Um, I'm forgetting his last name, but Timmerman wrote a couple books, one on the Iraq War, which is really not to be missed. But he actually, he was an expert on the Middle East, and he stumbled upon this connection. Well, the administration, what they wanted to do is they wanted to go after Iran. That's what they really wanted to do. But look at the geography of the Gulf. You don't have any invadable beaches or easily accessible ports that are subject to being seized easily on the Iranian coast. The Iranian coast is more rugged than like you go up to Basra and use a lot of beaches and places you could just bring vehicles in. You can come in from the sea. You don't have that with Iran. You can't invade it. You don't have any invasion route from the sea. It would be like, like there was no Normandy Beach in France. It was all just rocks and cliffs where you
gotcha.
couldn't bring stuff in. So it was just not a coast that you could actually invade through. They needed the big port of Basra in Iraq. They had to have that if they were going to go after Iran. So the invasion of Iraq was a staging to invade Iran.
Hmm.
That was Saddam was a bad guy. He broke a lot of his agreements. He was playing games with us, and he deserved to be put on trial and hung. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean,
He
gassed
deserved
upon
it.
a civilian.
Um, but the problem was, see, but the problem was invading Iraq was strategically not wise for us. See, that wasn't a wise thing, because that really, I mean, you take the West Bank and you multiply it times the size of Iraq, and then you have all these bad actors piling weapons in there, like Iran and Russia and China, to keep our soldiers dying in Iraq and keep the
Hmm.
situation all,
Prolonged.
turned upside down as long as possible and bleeding us there. Mostly of money, but there were Americans who died. Of course, it wasn't like Vietnam,
7,500.
where we lost nearly 60,000 dead, but there was a lot of wounded people, a lot of terrible injuries from those IEDs, those bombs. So
Let's
we got stuck. We got stuck there. But you see, what happened is we got so stuck in Iraq, it was impossible to go on to Iran and finish the job. And the job half done is really bad, because what we did is we upset the balance in the Middle East, because Iraq was counterbalancing Iran.
Yeah, if
And by going in there and setting up a democracy, it made Iraq into a Shiite country, Shiite run country, rather than a Sunni run country,
she
which
had,
meant that they weren't going to counterbalance Iraq anymore.
it's knocking down a building and taking out one column. It's like if you're gonna take it out, you got to hit all four columns at
You
once.
got to hit all of them. And I guess what I understood from my sources that Condoleezza Rice basically talked Bush down from going after Iran.
Iran, wow.
And that was, yeah. And that's the story behind that. So that was a blunder, which cost us in the Middle East. And now it's Saudi Arabia leaving and going to be with China and Russia is a consequence of that.
Hmm.
Because we're not really willing to protect them anymore. Well, Biden isn't, and he's kind of shoved them out into the wilds, and they've gone to look for who's going to protect us, and they've gone to looking for China.
Yeah, they've gone to a new sugar daddy.
Yeah, because they're not defensible. Iran is a regional power that's quite competent and could take them over. But Iran is sort of on a leash that China and Russia has, because Iran needs China and Russia. They all need each other.
It's kind of like what you're saying about knowing it was going to happen. It's kind of like when you're younger. I remember, you know, a decision would be made by mom and dad, and they would sort of buffer it. They would sort of soften it because we'd all be me and my brothers all be little kids, and it would be something like I remember when our first poodle Barney was getting older. I was just going into high school, so it wasn't as like traumatic. But when we were little, right? I think he lived to 13. I think we were expecting him to die at like 7, so it's kind of a moot point. But I remember like mom and dad knew, they're adults, that the dog was going to get too old and it was going to be in pain. You're going to have to put it down, right? And I just remember years prior, dad would just kind of like float it every once in a while, almost seeding it into the public consciousness of like, Barney's getting old. He's gonna go. And when you're younger, you're like, he's gonna live forever. And luckily, he did keep going. So by the time he did pass, I was 16, and by then I was in high school and running after women. So it kind of didn't. But it kind of put it out there like something's happening. I remember when my grandma was really getting up in age, and this was only a couple years ago, and it wasn't really as necessary, but it was still there. Mom, dad, the aunts, they'd be like, it's everyone really, let's give Mimi like a good Christmas. Everyone really hang out with her. Don't leave her in the living room by herself. Let's all, and it's the, no one wants to touch the fire, but we all know she's getting up. Then, eventually she passes. And when you're little, you hear these little floats of what are symbolic of like national decree. And you think that there's like an ability to change it. Barney's never going to die. And as you get older, you realize that the decision or the observation had been made. There was no negotiating. They were just softening the blow. And I feel like the more you read about administrations or the administrative state, the unelected, never changing deep state, blah, whatever you want to call it, you can sort of see what their decrees are,
Mm-hmm.
but they
Yeah.
float it out slowly. It's like 9/11, we're gonna go take down Afghanistan. We're all like, yeah, and they're like, and anyone involved with them, and everyone's like, huh? Like, and it's is Saddam involved? And everybody's like, I don't know. But you realize like the decision was made. They're
Mm-hmm.
just softening it. So I'm wondering now if we can sort of loop that into Ukraine. Was there writing on the wall, aside from the obvious us going in 2014? Was there writing on the wall that this was inevitable, and then
Oh,
we finally
well,
did it?
yeah. When the revolution happened in 2014, and I did a book with a couple other guys back then, The New Tactics of Global War, which was really done in response to the 2014 Euromaidan revolution, because it very much focuses on that. It was inevitable at that point because that revolution was an authentic people's revolution against Russian stooges running and looting Ukraine, which is contrary to a narrative you hear on the right, more and more like Tucker Carlson, which is he just simply doesn't, Tucker Carlson doesn't have the background to understand what he's talking about. Unfortunately, I admire Tucker, but he's wrong about that. Um, that it was inevitable that Russia would have to have a solution. to this Euromaidan, because here was a part of the Soviet Union. And you notice how Russia calls the former Soviet republics the near abroad. And it's assigned a department in the KGB. I mean, it's
What is it?
the,
The
the near
near
abroad. They
the
call it
near
the near
abroad.
abroad. That's Belarus, Ukraine, Central Asian republics, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia,
Oh,
right?
it's not English near abroad. It's a Russian word. Near abroad.
No, well, it's a translation from Russian. It's
Oh, okay.
near abroad.
Near
They
abroad.
use
Okay.
that's the translation of it, the near
Gotcha.
abroad.
Gotcha.
It's really part of so it was the Soviet Union. It's the 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union are still considered to be our domain, so to speak. But Ukraine was the special one because it was the biggest, most significant Soviet republic after the Russian Republic.
Breadbasket.
It was, yeah, and also the mining, the technical skills. A lot of Soviet engineers and scientists were Ukrainian. That a lot of their really skilled people. The Ukrainians are a very intelligent, adept people who have tremendous, levels of capability, as we can see in this war. They are in some respects, and I think Ukrainians will say this, that they're more capable than the Russians. They will make that argument that the Russians are not as capable as they are. That many of the people, for example, I've heard it said by some people in the former Soviet strategic rocket forces that that it was Ukrainians that made the strategic rocket forces from an engineering point viable. And that one Ukrainian told me, and his whole family was in the Soviet defense. They were defense engineers, right, in the missile area. And they said, without the Ukrainians, Russia can't maintain its strategic rocket forces. Now that's an opinion. It could be an exaggerated self-opinion from a Ukrainian, but I think there's reason to take it into account because Ukraine was just so important to the building of that strategic infrastructure in Russia. And Russia's had to go on. And Russia, by the way, has continued to rely on Ukraine. But when 2014 came along, this fissure opened up where Ukraine threw out, because Russian agents, essentially, Russian, stooges is the pejorative word, like Viktor Yanukovych, the president, and the Party of Regions and the Communist Party. Those were the two parties that were really in charge in Ukraine. Were basically taking their marching orders from Moscow in managing the country and taking a big share of the loot, for basically looting it and keeping the Ukrainian people, because what they really didn't want, Ukraine, like in Russia, the real problem is when a middle class develops in these countries, because they've allowed a certain freedom of speech and some freedom of economics, because the Soviet system still, the nomenclatura, the communist families, they still run all the important things. But now they've opened up a space and allowed people to open their own shops, to start their own production on the side, small businesses. And actually I think it was by 2008 or 9 or so, just around the time of the Georgian War, about almost 1 in 3, 30% of Russians either work for somebody that owned their own business or they own their own business, small businesses. So this enormous economy had grown up, a little small scale free economy. And those were the people that were protesting in Moscow and St. Petersburg against when Putin went to come back from being prime minister and Medvedev stepped down and he ran again for a third term as president. Those were the people that were protesting the Soviet style, march that Putin had towards this, what he kind of Sovietized nationalism like Stalin did. And he took all the Soviet words out, but it was really the same thing. And so this was, but in Ukraine, they had the same process was going on. Only in Ukraine was not Russia. It didn't have the SBU, which is the Ukrainian KGB, was split between people who were loyal to Moscow and people who really weren't. And this is true throughout many institutions. You had the Russians. There was a Russian Boris.
Bear,
I,
Bear, Bearsoft.
what's it?
Is it Bearsoft?
No, no. He's a Ukrainian guy who worked in Ukrainian television. And I'm Anyway, I interviewed him. He did a study. He wrote a study on the elite of Ukraine, and he found out that 51% of the elite in Ukraine, and this is the bankers, the financial elite, the parliament, the security services, the military, half of them had gone to KGB schools and been educated in the Soviet Union in KGB academies and schools. And he'd done this study, and it was really quite stunning, showing that the KGB structures as part of the sword and shield of the Communist Party, and that other Ukrainians were telling me, Boris Chikole was his name. He left Ukraine. He lives in, last I heard, he lives in Germany. But Boris, it was a very interesting study. And the other Ukrainians had said to me, it isn't really the KGB, though. The KGB is the front man for it, but it's the Communist Party Soviet Union underground that still runs the former Soviet countries, except for the Baltic states and maybe Georgia. Georgia's a funny case. And then, so in Ukraine, so they were still controlling Ukraine. And by the way, the statues, supposedly communism had fallen in Ukraine in late 91 like it did in Russia, but all the statues of Lenin were in all the towns.
Hmm.
They hadn't torn them down. They hadn't taken down the Soviet symbols even. But what happened in 2014 is they tore down hundreds and hundreds of statues of Lenin, got pulled down. You can even go on YouTube and you could see, kids coming out and hooking up, cables to the bumper of a pickup truck,
Mm-hmm.
wrapping it around Lenin's statue and pulling him down. I watched numerous of these.
And sorry, I had a brain fart. And when
Yeah,
was this? What time?
2014.
2014. Okay. All right.
When they had the Euromaidan revolution, and it
Gotcha.
continued. They were pulling down.
I
I remember I watched a video. They were pulling down a statue of Lenin in April of 2014, after the
my
Euromaidan revolution. They were
my
just going around and pulling them all down, and the
my
cops would just stand there and watch them do it.
I remember some of that. So my deceased older brother who took his life in April 2014. I remember I was at home because I just finished college. I just finished college in December 2013 and I'd moved home to my parents' house. Um, and he had moved home too. And so for the first time since high school, there was just kind of this fluke where we were both at home again. It was like a shitty sitcom, right? He was
Mhm.
27, I was 23, and I was going to go to medical school that fall. Point is, so it was just he and I hanging out. And I remember he and I it was on a website called the Ustream. The letter U, stream. That's where Rogan used to be on. And we were watching the revolution. We would stay up. We were completely. It's honestly like some of my fondest memories with my brother is he and I like fucking like heating up chicken fingers at like 1 in the morning and being like we'd watch and it's terrible because there's death and destruction, but we'd be watching it and like that like one town square that like all the famous photos.
Maidan in Kiev, yeah,
Yeah,
the Maidan,
with like the
yeah.
thing in the center, and we would watch it and we'd pick guys out and we'd be like there's the guy again with the orange hat, like he's still alive, and like we'd cheer people on. But yeah, I remember watching that, and I kind of in hindsight, I don't think I understood how historic we thought it was just sort of like I don't know, like what almost like watching Russian webcams, and I don't think even we realized what was happening at the time.
It was the biggest, most significant revolution of the 21st century so
Yeah,
far, and
yeah,
it's comparable to the French and the American revolutions, in the sense that they transformed. The French Revolution transformed Europe, and the American Revolution was transformative too. And really, the Euromaidan Revolution is closer to the American Revolution in how it started and how it worked, because it was, you're there in New England, when General Gage went to go take the guns from the people of Massachusetts, and the militias turned out and they just started open fire on the British and chased them back to Boston. That was amazing.
yeah.
Nobody saw that one coming, and the Continental Congress meeting, and then, picking George Washington to be in charge of this Continental Army. So it was a war. It was the actual war in Ukraine. there's a sea change. These people, look, the American people, George Washington considered himself a British American. These
Yeah.
people thought of themselves as British. They fought, Washington fought in the French and Indian War against the French for the British,
And
right?
then
What was
got
it?
French assistance to fight the British
Well, that
in the
came
American
later.
Revolution.
Yeah, the American Revolution that came later, and but nobody would think of calling the American Revolution a proxy war, where we Americans were just proxies for France, because it
Sure.
wasn't true. There was a real thing happening here.
A real
But
thing
this is,
augmented by France.
and the French didn't even get involved until after we showed that we could win, which is
Yeah.
the same thing in Ukraine, by the way. A month after the Russian invasion, the White House didn't want to send any help to Ukraine. A
Yeah,
month
they
after.
yeah, they were walking it in slowly.
I know a guy that was in the White House. He was working with Congress. He was trying to get, whip up. We had to send help to him, and so the Ukrainians were getting nothing from us, and it's a whole month. But it was when the Ukrainians were able to win on their own, just like the Battle of Saratoga for us, when we showed the world that we could beat the British Army at
Well,
Saratoga.
it's any sound investment,
Right. Well,
right?
yeah,
It's
you
just
don't
what it
reinforce
is.
defeat.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
don't, yeah, it's like, wow, these people are really fighting. They're really doing it. Maybe it's in our interest to help them.
yeah.
And of course, the help ended up being extremely important for us and for the Ukrainians. So, and so to describe this revolution, it's very important for people to understand this, because there's so, people tread out that tape recording between the two,
Oh,
Victoria Newland
yeah.
and what's his name? I can never think of his name, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine.
No, I know who you're
And
talking about.
and
Yeah.
they were, I've listened to the recording over and over again. There's no coup plotting in that recording. It's two diplomats being asked by Ukrainians, what do we do to form a new government? Who do you have any advice for us? And they were thinking of the advice to give them. And like part of the discussion was, well, Klitschko, the boxer, he has no experience. Don't make him, he can be mayor of Kiev, but don't make him anything important. So they were just politicians, these people were just U.S. diplomats being asked for advice. There was no coup. What happened in Ukraine was this Party of Regions and Communist Party and the whole apparatus that was holding down the Ukrainian people that had acted so badly, and it had finally the Ukrainian people stood up against it. They when they killed the Heavens 100, 100 people shot down, killed in Maidan Square, and all the oppression, the country was not going to accept this behavior from their government anymore. And so you got millions of people. So Yanukovych basically just his safety could not be guaranteed by other local rulers. There was going to be a conference. I understand, I think the governor who was in charge of it said, I can't guarantee your safety. I think his bodyguards couldn't guarantee his safety. He'd murdered his own citizens, and in a way that was visibly not justifiable. And so he fled, and the prime minister fled, and governors fled, and SBU officials fled. People fled at all levels. All of these shills that worked for Moscow, holding down Ukraine, they fled to Russia. And so the Ukrainian people woke up and said, where's the president? Where's the prime minister? Where are all these officials?
Where's the
They didn't have a
leaders?
government,
Yeah.
right? They fled. So the thing is it wasn't a coup, because in a coup, you take over the government, you
Remove.
put guns on them, and you arrest them and whatever. They were never arrested. They were never forced out. They fled of their own accord. They advocated.
This was more like squatters' rights.
Well, it's like the country doesn't have a government.
That's why it's closer to squatters' rights than it is a
Yeah.
coup.
Well, it's you had a constitution. Ukraine had a constitution. It's like, under the constitution, what do you do if the president abandons the country? You have to appoint an interim
Yeah.
president and call elections, which is what they did.
Yeah.
Right. So there wasn't a revolution. There was a president who just abandoned his office.
Gotcha.
So but that's totally constantly misrepresented by people like Douglas McGregor and Tucker Carlson and people like, I think that I've even heard Steve Bannon maybe misrepresented, because they hate the Democrats and the left so badly. They want to claim that somehow they did it.
Well, it's just as bad as it's no different than Trump derangement syndrome. Anything Orange Man does is bad.
Right. And
It's an
then
inability to give credit where credit's due.
and
Or
anything Orange Man does is good is also deranged,
which is
right?
also yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's also
Trump, yeah,
deranged
it's yeah, and if Biden does
because
it, it's good. If Trump does it, it's
yeah,
bad,
I
vice
mean,
versa. No,
we're
it's
human beings and it's not everything I do is good. It's not, if I tell you
no,
everything I do is good, you know I'm lying,
yeah, no,
don't
it's
you? You know?
we're tribal cattle pigs. That's what we are.
Yeah. So so this was the deal and they had to and so there's been some very good books written on this and good journalism done about this, but people don't seem to they want to stick to these narratives that they're given
Well,
by people.
there's nothing sexy. I'm sorry, I know I keep interrupting you. I'm getting excited.
Yeah.
Um, and by the way, if you can hear all the traffic, I have all the windows open because it's
No,
beautiful out.
no traffic.
All right,
No.
good. But yeah, no, well, no one wants the less sexy, more difficult answer, right? You want to diet, the first thing you do is number one diet pill versus the unhappy answers like go to the gym and eat less. But I'm hungry. Well, that means you're burning fat. It's because it's not fun. No one wants to hear it. It's what it is. So
If you're hungry, either that or you're eating food with high fructose corn syrup.
yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah.
eat something, yeah, eat vegetables, eat something with a high or low glycemic index, whatever. The point is the answer, the the strong answer is often it's not a secret. I'm friends with a couple like Delta Force operators, and I remember I got to go shooting with them once, and they told me they're like everyone in like the quote unquote lower tiers always asks them because they're like the Olympians of special forces. What are the secrets? They go, there's no secret. We use the same gun you use. You master the basics, and then you increase the rate at which you're able to execute the basics. So what appears to be a secret is actually just someone who's tied their shoes
Training,
10 million times.
drilling. Yeah. They're
So
just drilling at it. They're just
yeah,
better drilled at it.
yeah, no, and they're the ones that will tell you they don't take days off because their skills degrade at 3% a day. Well, you got to be pretty good to know that. Point is
Yeah.
there's nothing sexy. I mean, I love it because I'm a nerd, and you love it because you're a nerd, and I say that as a compliment. There's nothing sexy about reading 50 books about the history of the CIA by liberal and conservative authors, by Americans and foreigners, to look at everything and get the most accurate picture you can of go. They've done some good shit, they've done some bad shit. They're more competent than not, but they're not perfect. And that's how you get the most accurate picture of like the CIA or whatever topic. I'm listening to Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes.
That's a very important book.
Yeah, I read it when I
Yeah.
was 18 because I was
Yeah.
grounded because I got caught with
Yeah.
alcohol, and so I had nothing else to do. But like, that's not a fun answer, right? You want to be able to say,
No.
why does this make Biden bad? Why does this make Trump impeachable? Instead of going back and looking at like, all right, it's a very rich history that started 80 years ago and things have been in motion, and that's
Well,
not a fun
what you
answer.
see is there's a,
You want the soundbite.
intelligence is a very complicated thing. We did not before World War II, the United States, except for military intelligence, we didn't have a
The
CIA. We didn't
OSS
have
and
an intelligence agency.
the
We
Black Vault.
created the OSS, for the purpose of dealing with World War II issues. Then the CIA was created afterwards, but we don't culturally. America is not a police state. It's not a country that deals with intelligence and counterintelligence issues well. And Americans can't keep their traps shut. They don't have discretion. They can't keep secrets. This is very well known. And they now you teach them these corrupting doctrines, psychological warfare and all these things, these new fangled disciplines, strategy disciplines that came out that if you were steeped in traditional military writings or the code of Washington or Wellington, the moral code of war, you would go, I know that's not a good thing to be teaching your soldiers.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing to predicate agencies on deception and all these things. These are more appropriate to countries with sinister national histories like China and Russia, led by despots for centuries and suppressing anybody who disagrees with the regime in sometimes very brutal, but also very deceptive and cunning ways.
Yeah. I think it was Dulles that said, uh, yeah, Americans don't like the idea that in order to fight a communist, he said this in the 50s, in order to fight an enemy that is hell bent on world domination, a godless enemy, hell bent on world domination that has nothing off the table, we ourselves need to create an amoral agency willing to do anything. And Americans can't sit well with that idea.
Well, and Dulles was an amoral,
Yeah.
godless
Yeah.
person
He's
himself.
fucking crazy.
Yeah, he was bad. So, and the thing is that so you can't, and the thing is if you're going to have your godless people fighting the godless people over there, you're going to find out that your godless people are working under the table with their godless people and are being
Yeah.
corrupted by them because they're much better at the godless people game. They're
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
better at it.
Yeah.
If you're a communist subversive, you're just better at sniffing that out. And you've
Yeah.
got the Russian look, one Russian, Andrei Navrazov, I interviewed him years ago. He was saying, look, it's not conspiracy theory. It's the way the KGB works and the way the Russia works. It's not a conspiracy. It's their culture. It's their national culture, a culture of deception, deceiving foreigners, and of playing these intelligence games. Because it goes back to Ivan the Terrible and probably long before him. You know, when he created his own little gang of sinister operatives to suppress his opposition and control people. And that game, you know, is really ancient in China. You know that the earliest, I read this book a few years ago on Chinese intelligence, and I was shocked to find that the earliest record of a fake defector, someone pretending to defect from one
Uh-huh.
polity and going over to another and then tricking them,
Double agent.
is ancient China in 1900 BC, if you can believe that.
Jeez.
That is a long history of treachery. And in China, the most famous heroes in China aren't their great generals, aren't Alexander the Great and Caesar or something. They're these guys, these defectors, who go and work for some king of whatever, and end up, you know, wrapping them around their finger and bringing them
Well,
down for
well,
their
that's
for the king they're really working for, right?
well in the same way. I mean, that is just objectively, remove ethics and morals in terms of praising a figure, and Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, you're praising someone who got the job done and their ability to do it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Hitler got the job done, a demon from hell, but he did rise to power and start World War, right? So I
Yeah.
mean, if you're a fake defector and you're able to do it without firing a shot, yeah, I mean, in terms of praising someone for getting you can love an NFL player because they have the most rushing yards. They might beat their wives and might be a horrible person, but if you like the football game, you're going to go objectively, he's the best. That
Right.
makes sense. I mean, someone that can wrap a king around their finger and not fire a shot, you have to again, doesn't mean you're morally or ethically for it, but
Well, their culture views it that way. Um, and of course, Machiavelli got a bad name for saying that, you know, if you tell the truth in politics, you'll be destroyed. So you need to lie by, you know, in order to survive in politics, you need to lie because the other people are lying to you. Um, that received a rebuke of all people from uh, kings and bishops and politicians all over Europe. Machiavelli's name was you know, the same as for the devil, the same as the devil. He was sort of old Nick. He was advising people to be treacherous. Even modern writers have denounced him for what he was writing. It
what's
was a
old
teaching of evil, right?
who's old Nick?
Well, he was Nikolai, you know, old Nick is the nickname for the devil, but
Oh,
Machiavelli's name was Niccolo, so he was
oh,
Nick.
gotcha.
So he even had the devil's nickname, right?
Yeah.
But Frederick the Great wrote a whole book denouncing Machiavelli.
Hmm.
And it's really brilliant because Frederick the Great was brilliant. And so there's a moral, the West is more moral, has this moral part of it that the East doesn't have. You don't have the combining of the idea of rulership and aristocracy and kingship in you have Confucius in China who does some of that, but you have this other school, the legalist school, Han Feizu, who mocks Confucius. And so you have this other legacy underneath the surface. So you have these two things in China where when the Han dynasty was established. They said, we have to get rid of Han Fei-tzu. We have to get rid of Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu also advised treachery and deception. I mean, he was very Machiavellian. It was like a Machiavellian on steroids, Sun Tzu. All warfare is based on deception.
That-
You don't see that in the West. Warfare is based on honor and chivalry, right?
and you have to wonder, well, which one is more, which one's going to survive natural selection more, right? You can,
Well, the West, because we saw what happened when the West went up against China, China crumbled.
yeah, yeah, no,
I mean,
but there
China
is,
succumbed.
yeah, there
And the
is,
only reason China even appears to have a chance is because the West has succumbed to some of these these immoral doctrines, so that the West has been weakened by it. But the traditions of the West, Western society, it is Julius Caesar was an evil figure. Alexander the Great had a sinister side, and they ended badly. Probably, if Plutarch speculates that there's a letter from Alexander the Great's mother that the great philosopher Aristotle poisoned Alexander the Great,
there is something kind of poetic about.
and because Alexander the Great murdered his nephew, Aristotle's nephew, and of course we know what happened to Julius Caesar. He was murdered in the Senate. He was hacked to death with daggers.
There's something poetic about if you adopt the immoral, unethical, dishonorable method, it is in the short term, it's a gain. You can
Yes,
you can win, but in the
you
long
can
term,
win.
it poisons the actual system itself.
Yes, it does. In fact, now this is we don't have all of Tacitus's works, but if you read Tacitus, the Annals of Imperial Rome, especially, where he goes through the reigns of the Caesars, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and then Nero, this is a slide into insanity where they all are murdering and poisoning each other until the last one of the Julio-Claudian line, who is Nero, kills himself when his bodyguard's coming after him.
The final.
When an artist dies in me, and he stabs himself. So basically they killed themselves. It was total destruction. They were just killed off. And they did it to the last one killed himself. They just murdered themselves.
If I wanted to get this podcast, because I'm always watching subscriber numbers and downloads, and they grow at a healthy rate, but I'm greedy and want it to be faster. I could absolutely I haven't gone total war with this podcast. Like there is a nuclear option, and the nuclear option, it would be getting guests on, doing ambush journalism. It would be having someone on after this and talking shit about Jeff Nyquist. It would be stabbing other guests in the back. And for a brief moment, it would get a lot of views, right? I could really do some embarrassing things about who, even if it's not true, right? Issue a retraction quietly later. I would never talk to Dr. McCullough again. Dr. Malone would never respond to me again. You would never respond to me again. But for a brief moment, I could jack the views up, but then it's dead. I've salted the earth, and no one will come on Tommy's podcast again because he's a backstabber. It's kind of the same thing as you can adopt these methods. It will kill you in the end.
Well, and there's something else about this morality. It's of a piece. When you behave in a really rotten way towards other people, it sets things in motion we don't even understand. People talk about quantum entanglement. They talk about, their spiritual consequences. There's things you set in motion that you don't understand because there is a God and the universe is created and we're creatures. It sets things in motion. Yeah. And it's self-destructive. It's not the way things are supposed to be. It is not make for a happy situation. And so you end up becoming this cramped, paranoid, almost stupid kind of being that cannot because you're so busy deceiving other people, you're also end up deceiving yourself. So you don't even see the world anymore. You don't even see reality anymore.
Well,
you're believing you're believing your own poison.
Well,
you're eating your own poison.
It's the paranoia of every dictator of they no longer trust their own guards, their own family, their own, and so therefore the only people that will approach them are yes men who only tell you what you want to hear. And
this is what we see in China and Russia.
It's also Hitler giving orders up until the last day.
Well, and Hitler, look at what did Hitler do? He ended up, alienating his generals.
Yeah.
turning his subordinates against him, and then calling them traitors. I mean, what did he do? He ordered the arrest of Goering
Yeah.
at the end of the war. He ordered the arrest of Himmler at the end of the war. His immediate lieutenants, he
And
turned on them and had them, we're going to have them all arrested.
I think
Right?
who was it? It might have been Albert Speer. It might have been someone else who was getting ready to defect, and they went in and talked to him in the bunker. And I think it was in Annie Jacobson's Operation Paperclip. He goes in, and Hitler's like, "So you're leaving?" And he's pretty much like, "Yeah." And he goes,
Well, according to Speer, Speer actually was honest with Hitler and said, I didn't follow your destruction order.
uh, it was one.
And Hitler just ignored it. Uh,
It was
you
one of the
know,
top guys talked to him in the bunker.
yeah, it
Basically,
was Speer. Yeah,
okay.
I know the story. Yeah.
Yeah, and but the takeaway is he goes up to him and he goes like, like Mein Führer, basically like I love you and like until fate brings us together again in the afterlife or whatever. And Speer and Hitler just goes bye. Doesn't even say like Auf Wiedersehen, it just says like bye. And Speer, if this is who I'm talking about, later says like a lifetime of dedication to this guy, and he doesn't even look at me, he just goes bye.
Mhm.
And you're like, wow. And that's what it is the demon completely takes over the being.
Yeah. There's a severe narcissism in a lot of these leaders. And so, getting back to this the Ukraine
Oh
war,
yeah, I forgot we were talking about
uh,
Ukraine.
we want to steer it back to the Ukraine war. You have this dysfunctional, evil system in Russia, which is really it's a continuation state of the Soviet Union. It's the same basic staff at the very top that are managing it. The Soloviki, they're basically it's the KGB, it's the old party apparatus hidden behind it all. The presidential administration is really just a mechanism of the old Communist Party Central Committee, and the party money's still there. The Communist Party is still there behind the scenes. They hide what they do, and of course the army. You have the army, the party, and the KGB was the Iron Triangle, and you really have this there. And Putin was the guy that ended up at first being a figurehead and becoming indispensable because his personality was able to stabilize the regime. And to allow the justification that the development of this new kind of hybrid ideology, which they had to bring in because they couldn't bring Marxism Leninism back. The Russian people wouldn't accept it, so they had to create that. But they were still holding the Soviet Union together in the expectation of when the time was right, when the West was starting to crumble, they would put the Humpty Dumpty of the Soviet system back together again. And Putin, you look at Putin's whole reign is a series of steps moving back to the USSR, little by little. Reintroducing things that existed under the Soviet Union, little by little, even reintroducing symbols of the Soviet Union. And actually flirting with Stalinist kind of themes and ideas, flirting with the idea of renaming Stalingrad, which is now Volgograd, renaming it Stalingrad. Can we get away with that? Should we do that? So the system, it's an attempt to grope their way back to what they believe they had. I mean, Putin has said that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy
Mm-hmm.
of the 20th century. And he really meant it. And so you have to listen to what these dictators say because they're really giving you everything away. When he says he's a Christian and then he says, well, it's really, Marxism is right out of the Bible, and I never threw away my party card, and I like Marxist Leninist ideas. When he says that, he
Listen,
is lying to you, but he's telling you the truth.
yeah,
You have to understand that Marxist Leninists cannot be a Christian.
yeah.
You can't like those ideas and be a believer
Well,
in Jesus Christ. You
there
can't.
can't be a higher order than the state.
Well, it's Marxist theory is more complicated than that, of course, but so this is what the war in Ukraine was about, holding the old Soviet system back together again and bringing it back. And that derailed that. The Ukrainian people standing up and wanting to have their country for themselves. And what one Ukrainian told me was, speaking as a person, part of the intelligence system, he said, we had a choice. We could go with Moscow, and Moscow was expecting us to go with them, or we could go with the Ukrainian people. And what happened is a large enough number went with the Ukrainian people to support them that the revolution worked. And they have been reforming their system. It's a difficult thing to change from essentially Soviet institutions. But Russia couldn't leave them alone and let them do that. So the idea was they annexed Crimea in 2014, and that was spontaneous, and it was pretty artfully done. And I guess Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, gets a lot of the credit because he was kind of put in charge of it, the little green men, and then they created the fake. They murdered 4 Crimean activists who were wanted to oppose the referendum, right? To oppose Crimea becoming part of Russia, and they were tortured and murdered. That was covered up. And then they just brought in people to make it look like there was this groundswell who wanted Crimea to be Russian. And in Donbass, they did something similar, only it didn't go so well. Because the Ukrainian government said, who are these people, starting this revolution in Donbass? And so they went in and they lo and behold, they discovered in some of the skirmishing, in the dead bodies, these were Russians. They weren't Ukrainians. They weren't Donbass people. And they discovered that the Russians, of course, had always used this divide and conquer game in Ukraine, where they would pit the Russian-speaking Ukrainians against the Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians, the West against the East and the South. And there was that tension, and the Russians just fed on it in dividing. But that started to break down when this war started in eastern Ukraine, and a lot of the people that went to fight the Russians' attempt to create these 2 breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine, they were Russian-speaking Ukrainians, like the people in the Azov battalion. They were Russian-speaking Ukrainians. And by the way, if they want to say that Nazis were in the Azov battalion, which was financed by a Jewish oligarch, by the way, and it wasn't required that you have,
Wow. I didn't know that.
Kolomoisky, he basically financed the Azov battalion, ultimately regiment, and financed, I think it was, what was it called? Dnieper 1 was the other
That's hilarious.
battalion. But he's a guy who built a lot of synagogues. Look, the Azov battalion they have a couple guys, the guys that formed it were influenced by some of these Nazi ideas, but it wasn't, most of the people didn't join it for that reason. It wasn't a political party. It wasn't
there's a meme that
yeah.
pointing fingers, going the fucking Nazis here and there. There's a funny meme about, I don't know, somebody who thinks Elon Musk is the new orange man, and it goes, I sold my Tesla. I'm no longer supporting SpaceX. I don't support space agencies that hire Nazis. I'm going full NASA.
Well, I mean, look, the Nazi
hilarious is
thing.
that not
Yeah,
NASA was
I mean,
mostly Nazi.
the Russian propaganda is that Ukraine is a Nazi country, but
Yeah.
their president is Jewish. I mean, it
no. The
yeah,
contradictions flow freely. You're thinking too deep, Jeff. You're thinking too deeply.
No, but I'm just showing that the people who embrace that don't think at all. They're totally unthinking.
It's nothing matters.
And here's an interesting one: the Wagner Group.
Yeah.
Wagner was a Russian commando guy who loved the Third Reich so much he got that nickname Wagner, right? And he's got like Nazi, I understand he's got like Nazi tattoos and everything. So it isn't, this is just
Post-truth reality.
Narratives that are meant
Nothing
for
matters.
simple people. Yeah.
Nothing matters.
But the real war, so the war in Donbass started in 2014. And of course, here you had these volunteers going in. The Ukrainian army was by no means ready, and they were just forming a new government. So they were, mainly the reason that, by the way, the main reason that the Crimea operation succeeded was Ukraine didn't have a government, couldn't respond. But when they got to doing it in Donbass, there was a Ukrainian government and they did respond. And that's partly why the war ignited there and not in Crimea.
Gotcha.
And so that war raged for 8 years. And it was expected, the Russians really expected to break down the Ukrainian government, to hurt the Ukrainian economy, and to sap their strength as a country, to kind of force them back under their shills again, to dominate it. And it backfired. It had the opposite effect, that the longer the war went on, the more the country was united, the more that it went on, the more Ukrainians saw Russia as a problem and not as their Slavic brothers, and that they basically destroyed whatever love and brotherhood the Ukrainians felt. And so and it's interesting, when Zelensky gets elected president, then in 2019, Zelensky is a native Russian speaking Ukrainian. He didn't grow up speaking Ukrainian as his first language.
Hmm.
And he was a famous actor, not only on the film and screen for Ukrainians, because his first films and television were all in the Russian language. For Russians, he was famous in Russia because he was a film star in the Russian language.
And
And
then,
so and so he becomes a president, and he gets elected overwhelmingly. He won 73% of the vote, and
jeez.
he won both in the Ukrainian West, the Ukrainian speaking West, and the Russian speaking South and East. And of course, he was a comedian, and he knew how to communicate. He was a good communicator. He was inexperienced at government and had a great deal of trouble because fighting the corruption and everything. It is a terrible, difficult
And
thing.
then just 100,000 foot view again of the contradictions flowing freely is, and I'm conservative, but the idea that conservatives are going to attack Zelensky because he was in show business, he's not a politician. Reagan and Trump, two
Yes,
conservative
right.
gods, are
Yes.
for the very same reasons. Not
And
they're outsiders who
yes.
came in, and if they didn't do well, it's because they were
Yeah.
fighting corruption.
And Zelensky was, get this is a man, if you read Zelensky's inaugural address when he became president, he quotes Ronald Reagan as his model, as an actor who became a president of a country he admires. He quotes Ronald Reagan. So here is Zelensky, he's quoting Ronald Reagan. And because, how many times did we see um, different comedians, Bob Hope or whoever, dressed in drag, dressed
Yeah,
as women. So Zelensky dresses as a woman or does something gay that's goofy. He's suddenly gay, although he's
but there's
heterosexual, he's married
there's a
and has
video of
kids.
Giuliani dressed as a woman hanging out with Trump.
Yeah, there you
But
go. I mean,
that was
look,
just a gaffe. But this is really
it's a gag,
Zelensky.
but a comedian does it. He's a comedian. It's
And
a
it's
joke. It's a
so
freaking joke.
so a show business comedian goes into politics, and we're supposed to hate him because he's not a politician, unlike Reagan and Trump, and he is fighting corruption, unlike Trump, who's fighting the deep state, but Zelensky's fighting corruption, and then that's bad, and then he's a Nazi, but he's Jewish, and Wagner
Right.
are the good guys, but they're German, and fuck communists and fuck socialism, but all of a sudden we're on the side of Russia, who are a bunch of
Allied with China
communists.
and getting in North Korea and Venezuela and
There
Cuba.
is no reality. We just simply are moving the pieces around on a board, and we're going,
Yeah.
this is now this part of the, it's a square, and we're just dividing it up and saying this is now blue and that's red. And in
Well,
eight
see,
months, it'll change
yeah.
again.
Well, you can't use the C word. You can't say something's communist. That is the success. That shows you who's succeeding here and who's really involved. The fact that China, look, Russia gave Cuba, I think it's 25, what is it, 25 million metric tons of wheat or something like that. I mean, so the Cuban Communist government gives official thanks to Vladimir Putin and the Russian government for this. And it's the second year in a row that they've sent enormous quantities of grain to Cuba. Why? Why are the Russians building military infrastructure for the Nicaraguan communist Daniel Ortega? Why does Nicolas Maduro, in a speech in January, say that we need to form a new bloc, like a communist bloc of countries? Maduro's a Marxist-Leninist in Latin America, and then he refers to our elder brothers. Our elder brothers will help guide us. Our elder brothers are Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin of Russia. So there's a Latin American communist calling Xi Jinping and Putin his elder brothers, and they're aligned. And so, it's the communist bloc. The Cold War didn't end. The Soviet Union didn't go away because we never drove a stake through the vampire's heart.
Yeah,
There was never, as Vladimir Bukovsky pointed out, there was never a
we didn't tap the
Nuremberg.
head. We
Yeah,
never tapped the head.
yeah, there was never a Nuremberg trial where communism went on trial, and we didn't drag the communists out and say, you did all these bad things. We had denazification in Germany, which was not it didn't completely work. but they didn't even try any illustration in
Yeah.
Russia. The same old people. And, I've even heard Russians say, I'm so stupid. These old Soviet apparatchiks from the Politburo are in the Senate. They're in the Russian, they're in the Duma. They're in the state council. So, it's a difficult thing. And by the way, when they were independent, Donetsk and Luhansk, those breakaway republics were openly communist. They were openly communist People's Republic type governments.
I have to like catch myself with my own contradictions, where I'm like, if you just snap Reagan's here and you go, we are funding Ukraine to fight Russia, and there's corruption, he would go, yeah, there's probably corruption, but anything to fucking bleed communism dry. And I'm
Right.
just thinking like, no, but it's bad because Biden's doing it. He'd be like, it doesn't matter who's doing it. Take
Well,
down the
see,
evil empire.
Biden doesn't want to do it, and he wants the conservatives to be the ones to tell him to turn it off, and then he wills, you see, because Biden didn't step up. Biden had to be pushed
Yeah.
into doing this, into supporting Ukraine. And it was countries like Great Britain and Poland. The reason that the HIMARS got sent to the U.S. government said, no, we're not sending you those rocket artillery things.
Yeah.
It was Poland and Britain that threatened to out Biden's unwillingness to help Ukraine. So Biden was basically politically blackmailed into doing what he's done. And by the way, my understanding is not a single Abrams tank has yet reached Ukraine. 14 months into the war, and we haven't sent any heavy weapons like tanks or fighter jets to the Ukrainians. So what kind of support is this? What was it? Somebody said that we lost $85 billion worth of equipment in
Iraq.
Afghanistan,
Yeah.
but as of December of last year, we'd only sent 23 billion in terms of weapons to Ukraine. So we have not even sent as much weapons in Ukraine as we sent into little tiny Afghanistan in that conflict. And this is a full-blown war, the biggest
full-blown kinetic war. Yeah.
Kinetic war, the biggest war in Europe since World War II. And so that's a very important thing too.
Yeah,
But,
and then and this is me ridiculing myself. Biden's a communist plant. What is he doing? He's giving into the military industrial complex to fight Russia at all costs. What?
well, see, when you are engaged in the scissor strategy, which the Russians and the Chinese are, when you are part of the scissor strategy is you, just like in Ukraine, you had the Ukrainian speakers and the Russian speakers, and you use that as a basis to divide the country and use a divide and conquer strategy. In America, we have the left and right. So what you do is you infiltrate both the left and the right. This is what Russia has been doing, and China too. They infiltrate both sides, and then you pour money into the right and the left. And you could, through George Soros on the one side, and I'm not going to name the name on the right side, because he sues everybody who mentions him.
Rupert Murdoch.
No, he's a foreigner.
Well, you're not going to confirm it anyway because of that. So if I
he's a foreigner who pours money into the American right, he's a
Soros is
foreigner.
on the left. Who's on the right?
And Soros is a foreigner too. He's not really an American.
Yeah, but he's on the left.
But it's let me put it. There's an individual from a communist country that's financing the right in America. And there's an individual from a communist country that came from a communist country to us that's financing the left.
I know you're not going to confirm it because you say
no, it's not him. But I mean, I'm not going to confirm it. But look, you can do your homework and figure it out.
Just text it to me. I won't say it. Just text it to me.
You want me to text it to you?
Text it to me. I have to go use the bathroom anyway. So Jeff, you're because we're live. We can't.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, I'll write it here.
No,
don't think about it. You can think about it.
What I was gonna say is
okay. Well, does that name ring a bell for you?
Yeah, but it's gonna pop up because the screen's live streamed. So there.
How do you delete it? You tricked me.
No, I didn't. That's why I said. That's why I told you. I exited out. Maybe nobody saw.
Well, you have a person from a communist country financing the right, and you have a person from a communist country, George Soros.
Listen, if he sues me, that's a good problem to have because that means the podcast is big enough that it's getting to him.
Yeah. But I mean, look, this is just something to point out is that I believe that there's this game, the scissor
Yeah.
strategy, where they want to have an effect on both sides. Now that's a theory I have,
Yeah.
and I can argue for it. It's a reasonable theory to have. I think it is reasonable.
Yeah.
So if they want to make me famous by suing me, fine. But it is something that I don't think that we should be taking money or advice from people from those countries
Hmm.
actively to control both sides, each side of
Well,
our thing.
that kind of
And
that ties back into what we were saying earlier about the moral and ethical thing. Well, how would you stop money coming into a free society? You'd have to clamp down, and thus you are no longer the democracy you're trying to protect. So it's part of like the double-edged sword. Is like we are a free society where cash can flow in and out. China, you're not allowed to take the cash out. We are in a place where there can be it's the
see,
freedom.
I mean, we don't know who, if you say
Well,
George
sure,
Soros is financing the left and Mr.
this guy,
Guo is financing
yeah,
the right, you don't know for sure what's going on. But it's look, the right has there's this toxic narrative that's emerged on the right, and there's this toxic narrative on the left. And there's this divide and conquer game going on in the United States where the left and right are getting further apart from each other.
yeah, and
And I don't like the fact that foreign money is involved in fueling these narratives
yeah.
in any way. And of course, I agree with many of the things that people, that buy into these narratives agree with. But I violently disagree. I mean, some of the narratives that we're seeing on the right are just anti-Ukrainian and
Yeah,
pro-Russian, frankly.
yeah. But
And
I
that is like, how can you be against a country that's been invaded, naked aggression from a
oh,
country like Russia? How can you be against them?
it's back to play the devil's advocate to what you're saying is it's like it's a slippery slope, right? If we go, we this money is coming in and we think that they are doing it for these reasons, how quickly does that become weaponized? Well, you can't take money over here because that's from this opposing country. But the reason you might be doing it is because this is a political. Maybe you don't like Elon Musk for buying Twitter. So all of a sudden, his money from whatever South African mines
and
is
and
it's a
and
slippery
people do,
slope
I mean, yeah, it's
of
just, and you can't, I don't have any proof that
well,
there's
sure.
anything wrong with that. I don't have any proof that George Soros is working for the KGB or that Miles Guo is working for Chinese intelligence.
Oh,
I have
sure.
no proof, but it's just should be common sense that we should not
I I
take anything at face value from them,
well, absolutely. But I think
especially when it's dividing us, right?
I think I think we have to err on the side of like chaotic freedom in that this is
Right.
one of the pitfalls of a free society is this can happen. Well, where's that money coming from? Well, it doesn't matter. I'm floating a fucking new hotel chain and that's kind of the wild west of the United States is for better or worse, we have unsafe freedom. But that's what it is it's and then if you want to clamp down and go no more money from foreign nationals, well, how long until we say no money because it's supporting whatever the DNC, and then all of a sudden, and then the economy is no longer the thriving American casino. And I think you have to err on. I agree with everything you're saying. It's not good, but there's not a one size fits all. So I think we
Well,
have to err on the
so
side of chaotic freedom.
you have these narratives, which what we need to do as a country is we need to be united. And it's the miracle. See, what happened in Ukraine is Ukrainians, this division ended when they elected Zelensky. And that was when Putin understood and the Kremlin understood that the war in Donbass wasn't working. Ukraine was not going back over to them. They were not, their penetration of the government was weaker than they thought it was. And they needed to act before Ukraine got stronger and stronger, like Poland,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they needed to move on it. They needed to take it back. And so they developed this strategy, this decapitation strategy, which was they were going after Kiev. They wanted to decapitate the government and put in a puppet government and reestablish Russia's control. It's pretty simple that's what they were doing. And of course, we know that they failed. The Russian military failed, and the troops weren't properly trained and informed. They failed to neutralize the Ukrainian air defenses. They failed to adequately supply the army because they thought it was only going to be a few days. And they were still following 1940s tactics. They screwed up in their trying to bring in troops in behind Kiev at the airport there that they captured. And they had too many tanks and not enough infantry covering the tanks, and they lost a ton of tanks. And they got repulsed. And
Um,
now Ukraine has been getting stronger.
I was gonna say, and like there is a cure for this, but it's what we said earlier. It's not a sexy cure. It's you can have this sort of wild west that is the United States, so long as people read and keep themselves informed. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. It's because if you're having a discussion like we're having right now, you can go, "Oh, I could take foreign money. Yeah, I know they're probably going to try to pit me against the left. Fuck you, invest in my podcast." Like, but again, that's not, no one wants that. They want the Fox News soundbite. They want the CNN soundbite. They want the Reddit screen grab, owning the left, owning the right. And because of that, that stuff does pose a threat. But dude, I got to go to the bathroom really badly. Jeff, you're going to tell everybody where to find your book, your
Okay.
website. In the
Yeah.
description is Jeff's Twitter. Please go follow him.
Yeah. jrnyquist.blog is my blog. That is jrnyquist.blog. You can also buy my books on Amazon. There is The Fool and His Enemy is a good one to start with. I do occasionally sell copies of my book, which I only have. Sorry, I'm really tired. I didn't sleep that much last night. The Origins of the Fourth World War, which is a book that I basically was figuring out a lot of these things back in the 80s. That was really basically written in the late 80s, early 90s, and published in the late 90s, second edition. So I occasionally will sell some of those because they're really expensive if you buy a used copy on Amazon. And of course, there's The Lies We Believe In is a more recent book, which is taken from a number of essays I've written in the last 2 years, over the last 2 years. So, anyway, that's it. That's kind of the situation. So, but it's in talking about this whole issue of narratives, ideological narratives, and how narratives can be, and you don't ever really know if a person is advancing a narrative because they are actually insincere in doing it because they're a paid agent of influence, or whether they're advancing a narrative because they sincerely believe it, that they've somehow been co-opted or convinced of it in some way. Because I think most people that advance false narratives are genuinely convinced of them. And so it's very difficult to tell who is the bad actor at the bottom of it, because we all end up believing things that are not true. We all end up believing things that we shouldn't, and we maybe hopefully we find out before we embarrass ourselves too much in that regard. But you it's a difficult thing to try to get the lay of the land here when you have controversial figures from different countries who are not Americans, who are financing major narratives on the left and the right. And of course, you look at the narratives and you look at what they're advancing and what it is, and then you have to make an evaluation about, does this narrative make sense? And is this helping America or is it hurting America? And then you have to decide.
This is the downside of being hydrated, is you also have to use the restroom.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah.
And
Your
yeah,
kidneys are working, at least, you know
yeah,
that.
that much I do know. But I don't know, we've kind of gone all over the place. Tying back to Ukraine. How do we tie back to Ukraine?
Well, it's getting back to this general war. Look, one of the things the Russians and Chinese do that makes it very difficult is they send false defectors. And I mentioned, Chinese history. The earliest
Hmm.
recorded instance of a false defector is 1900 BC. And I don't want to cast aspersions on all people from China. There are many good people from China, and maybe Miles Guo is a good person from China. But objectively looking at the narratives that are put forward on the right and the left that are divisive, I see Guo and I see Soros as, in a way, very odd characters to be so influential in on both sides of the issue. Um, and my pattern recognition, if you just go from pattern recognition, um, we are, like we were talking about, the cognitive dissonance about surrounding all these different things, the narratives about Ukraine. You are being lied to some extent when the narratives don't line up with facts, when you're suddenly saying things that in retrospect, when you take in the larger context, seem ridiculous.
Hmm.
You realize that, wait a minute, he's Jewish, but he's a Nazi. That can't be true, about Zelensky. Um, you can't, and so the thing is, the contradiction is not in the narrative indicates that the people that are putting forward certain narratives are actually not who they say they are. Right? That's the real contradiction. So, like, for example, Biden, um, who, look, Bukovsky, the Bukovsky file, and I think I mentioned this on your show before. He has a Bukovsky file where he's got a Central Committee memo about Biden leading a senatorial delegation to Moscow in like 1979, where Biden is saying, look, guys, I have to say things against you for my constituents back home, but I'm really not against you. Biden's telling this to the Russians back in under the Soviet Union. Biden, was supported in getting into the Senate by Armand Hammer, who Edward J. Epstein has shown was a KGB agent. And they've got, declassified intelligence from Europe showing his activities in Europe in the 1920s. The guy was a KGB agent. The documentation is there. So he helped Al Gore Sr. and Jr. into the Senate too. And you've got the Council for a Livable World, which is basically a communist front. It was set up by communists, and Biden praises them, and they've been supporting Biden in politics for years and years. So how is a guy with this background actually to be trusted to oppose Moscow? Because Moscow they have his file. They have a thick file on Mr. Biden. And I'm sure that, when you get to Hunter Biden laptop and you get to these other things, I'm sure the Russians like to dangle things in front of Biden. Look, we can let things out of the bag that can hurt you. They could say that to Biden. You need to put the brake on this. But, Biden might say in return, look, you'd hurt yourself if you out me, because I am your friend after all.
Mm.
And I'm here, I can do a lot of things for you, but I can't. You've really stepped in it by invading Ukraine. I can't do everything for you.
Mm.
And so you can understand how it works, because after all, these people are, you look at Mr. Biden, he's not a very nice person,
Mm.
right? Look, the more you look into who he is,
Well, he's a ruthless politician.
yeah, yeah. And look, he wants to be president. He enjoys it, and he wants to run for reelection. And so, whatever you think of the Democratic Party, I remember I was at a communist meeting in 1983, almost 40 years ago. 40 years ago this month, or last month it was. And it was a Marxist-Leninist Communist Party member talking about, we are taking over the Democratic Party through its left wing, and we're going to elect a stealth communist president.
Yeah.
Did they do that when Clinton got elected, or when Obama got elected, or when Biden got elected? Are these the creatures of this communist takeover of the Democratic Party? When you look at the program of the Communist Party USA, for example, which is called The Road to Socialism, and you read it, everything in there is what the Democratic Party is doing.
Mm.
It's all about minorities and LGBTQ and wokeness and political correctness and the environment and blah, blah, blah. When Gorbachev retired as the dictator of the Soviet Union, he headed up what was a Green Cross International. He was the big environmentalist guy then, you see. And so these are all sabotage. These are all operations. Global warming, really? Do you really believe that? And that we have to cut off our own oil and gas industry
But
and
not China.
strangle our own economies?
But not
Who
China.
benefits? It's a cui bono question. Who benefits from that?
Yeah.
Russia and China, because they're not doing that
Of course
to
not.
their economies.
Yeah.
We're doing it. We're going to be responsible for the planet. I have not seen the ocean levels rise. Al Gore promised us back in 2007 that the
The
oceans were going
polar
to be
bears
up
will be
12 feet
gone
by
by
now.
now.
Yeah, I mean it's just baloney, but nobody's keeping track of this. Nobody's really watching it, and so you get to the Ukraine war, and they have to show their face because Ukraine is too big of a thing for them to just let it go. And what happened in Ukraine wasn't like they can have their buddies running Germany or France. Look at Macron; he's ready to kiss the toes of the Chinese leadership and come back and say, oh, maybe we don't need to be connected to the U.S. The U.S. We don't want to get involved in this conflict between the U.S. and Russia and China. We got to do our own thing, and thank goodness so many people in Europe basically put the thumbs down on Macron. But who is Macron? Who is Angela Merkel, a former Communist Party member from East Germany to lead the Christian Democrats? Look, sue me if you want, but look, I don't like it. And I'm going to say that this is not good and that we have been misled and that all these narratives we've been lied to and deceived. And deception is the art that Sun Tzu preached, that the Chinese practice and the Russians practice. And the Russians have practiced it so much that they've got you got Tucker Carlson, like I said before, convinced that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in the world. And Putin's got a reasonable, Jordan Peterson embarrassed himself with that horrible monologue about Russia and Ukraine war.
I didn't see that.
Oh yeah, no, don't. It's painful to watch.
Okay.
He's a psychologist. He's not a political scientist.
Yeah,
He
I
doesn't
know
know
who he
anything
is.
about the history of the country. Yeah, everybody knows who he
Oh,
is.
he's got good self-improvement tips. But
Yeah,
he's
there
not a
you go. But
geopolitical chess master.
no, and he whips out Mearsheimer, who's on the wrong track. You turn Machiavelli upside down and inside out, and you're the devil then. Look, realpolitik, yeah, there's some element of that, but you can't leave your morality at the door. And somebody who preaches morality to people the way is moralistic the way Peterson is, and especially quoting Solzhenitsyn of all people, and then turns around and is defending Putin. Look, Mr. Jordan Peterson, you don't know anything about Mr. Putin or Russia or the people that Putin has murdered. He has poisoned them with both biological and nuclear weapons.
Yeah,
Polonium is a nuclear weapon they killed Alexander Litvinenko with.
Mm-hmm.
Those are horrible murders, and they are politically motivated murders. And Mr. Putin is a member of the KGB, was a sword and shield of the Communist Party Soviet Union, and his Christianity is, he says, is the communism of Lenin taken right out of the Bible. Putin's own words. So, you're dealing with a practiced liar in Putin. He's lying because his lips are moving.
Yeah.
And the idea that somebody would credit him and his naked aggression against Ukraine, country that by the way, Russia promised in the Budapest Memorandum, which is in addition to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, they promised to respect the borders of Ukraine if Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. Now Ukrainian soldiers are being murdered and tortured by the Russians, and their cities bombed and bombarded because they gave up those nuclear weapons. That's what we have to look forward to if we allow our nuclear arsenal to continue to rot. Russia and China will bomb us.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have anything to fire back with,
no credible
why not?
deterrence. Yeah.
Why not? Because why not bomb? Look at if the Ukrainians are the Slavic brothers of the Russians, and Russia and Putin says, we have to rescue our Slavic brothers, are so important to us. There are no real Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are just Russians. This is how he treats his own, bombing their cities, turning them into rubble. It's just kidnapping. What is it? Is it 30,000 children that the Russians have kidnapped?
I think they're estimating it's Well, I think they're estimating it's off by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, it's an
300.
enormous number of children that they've taken from parents, and they've made refugees out of a significant portion of the Ukrainian population. Have had to flee to Poland and Romania and other countries. And by the way, more than 100,000 young Russians have fled Russia
Mm.
because they don't want to. I mean, there was a Russian banker, I'm forgetting his name now. He had everything. He was rich. He got his job because Putin asked him to take the job, and he left, and he's part of there's an actual military unit. He's like 50 years old. There's a military unit in Ukraine of Russians, and they're hoping that this war will cause their country to become free somehow,
Mm.
ultimately.
I wonder if there, how many are false.
Yeah, well,
Probably got a
the
couple in
thing is,
there.
yeah, sure. Well, whenever you have a diaspora
Well,
from
of course,
a
yeah, yeah,
dictatorship, they're going to plant their agents in that
sure.
diaspora,
Oh, yeah,
false defectors.
yeah, of
That is
course.
a standard practice: controlled opposition, infiltration, false defection, disinformation. These are all the elements of their strategy. But these things have fallen flat in Ukraine because the Ukrainians have stood up and they're fighting back, and the Russians have basically run through many of the troops that they raised in the fall, the 300,000 that they raised. It's either a combination of battlefield, dead, wounded, missing prisoners, and basically uh, uh, absent without leave, just going AWOL, just leaving their posts, desertion, right? Just standard desertion. And so they don't have the wherewithal. That's why Prigozhin of the Wagner Group and the army, they're sniping at each other. It's a blame game. Who's at fault for this disaster? Um, and there's a question of whether Russia can hold on to what they've taken, their ill-gotten gains in Ukraine, because the Ukrainians are modernizing, getting stronger. People say the Russian military has gotten better because, the experience in the fighting makes you better. But at the same time, the Ukrainians are getting better. The Ukrainians were better to begin with, as it turns out. And I think that the Russians are not that well motivated to fight, and their leaders don't treat their people right. And so I just the Russians actually are pouring concrete for bunkers now, and they're digging trenches, which is not a preparation for an offensive. The Russian offensive was the attack on Bakhmut. And although we heard over and over again that Bakhmut fell or was about to fall, my understanding, the latest news is that Bakhmut hasn't fallen yet. And 7 months of trying to take this insignificant town, and they have thrown away, some estimates, 10,000 or more men a month trying to take it. It's
Jeez.
like, no, not a good idea. Um, but it is a country Russia is a country that is morally bankrupt. It is heading for economic bankruptcy. It is politically bankrupt, and its military strategy is bankrupt. And hopefully they'll suck those communist criminals in China and North Korea down with them when they go. And maybe we'll have a world where people can really work together and not have all this evil subversion and building up of weapons and so on, and starting wars, which China, of course, is threatening against Taiwan. I think that if the Ukrainians had not stopped the Russians, we probably would have already seen some kind of military move in the Pacific by the Chinese.
Well, in the final 20 minutes or so that I have you, let's get into Taiwan. What are we gonna see there? Or are we? Or is it heating up over there?
Yeah, I mean, the last two military exercises the Chinese held were not a practice invasion; they were practice blockade. So this was my position all along, that an invasion by China of Taiwan never made sense militarily. But a blockade is to be expected because, look, amphibious warfare, you're dealing with air, land, and sea coordination all at the same time. It requires a lot of practice, a lot of study, a lot of institutional experience. The United States developed that by doing virtually unopposed landing in Operation Torch in North Africa in World War II, then stepping up and doing the landings against the Italians in Sicily in 1943, and then doing Salerno, and Anzio in Italy, and then finally graduating to Normandy, and then all those little invasions in the Pacific, that we did that ended up building up to where you had several Marine Corps divisions at Iwo Jima landing at once. A tremendous invasion of an island, and the Japanese knew how to fortify islands. So we had this tremendous experience doing this that we built up institutionally. The Chinese have done zero. They've never done an opposed amphibious landing of any kind that's of any seriousness. They practice things on their own coastline, but I don't believe that China could successfully invade Taiwan. Now, maybe I'll be proved wrong, but I don't think they're going to dare the odds, especially what they've seen happen with the Russians. The Russian military uses equipment, tactics, and organizational structures and doctrines similar to what the Chinese use. Because after all, the People's Liberation Army is modeled off the Soviet Army originally. It's just evolved a little bit away from that, but it's extremely similar. And so I don't believe that this is a military that could successfully conduct such an operation. I think that they have different military plans. The Chinese and the Russians, the Chinese did something very clever. You've heard of the Two Colonels book, Unrestricted Warfare, that came out, I think it was in 1999. I've read that book, and what stuck out to me is the sore thumb. They're telling us how, I'm exaggerating, how with a toenail clipper and a bobby pin, they can, bring down the United States. It's unrestricted warfare. They think all these low intensity little things they can do, death by 1,000 cuts. So they're going to nick us here and they're going to nick us here, and that's how they're going to beat us. But you see, the book gave itself away because throughout the book, there are these little asides like, oh, nuclear weapons are obsolete. Oh, we don't want nuclear weapons. Oh, it's idiotic to prepare for nuclear war. Nuclear war can never be fought and won. That kind of stuff all throughout the book. When the book was written, we know now that the Chinese were planning to build a giant nuclear arsenal because they're doing it now. They're getting close to having it now. They just bragged a few weeks ago that the Russians gave them the technology to mass produce nuclear warheads. Why would they want that technology unless they were going to do that? Yet this book was telling us they would never do any such thing, and that such a thing was stupid and foolish. Unrestricted warfare was itself an artful piece of disinformation.
Yeah.
To get us to believe 24 years ago
I've always
that they
believed
were
that.
they were not intending to build a big nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
And that in preparing to match any Chinese buildup, we would have a buildup. Because they didn't want us to start getting back into the nuclear, because we haven't tested a nuclear weapon since September 1992. We haven't built any new nuclear warheads since around that time. And so our nuclear arsenal is way past its shelf life. There are even some experts who don't think any of our nukes work, right? There are people who will step and say, oh yeah, they all work, but nobody knows until you actually test one. And not a virtual test, a real test.
Yeah.
And in the longer it goes, we're not going to have a new nuclear warhead, according to the
Sentinel.
head of the Stratcom, until 2029.
Yeah, I think it's the Sentinel.
Yeah. And are they going to really be able to pull that together? Nobody knows. And so we've got Admiral Richard said in testimony to Congress, that the head of Stratcom back in February of 2020 said that in 3 years, our nuclear arsenal will be unreliable, be past its shelf life. So I just know you as Congress, you're going to step in and you're going to allow us to, do something. Well, of course, the Democratic Congress, they weren't going to do anything. They weren't going to step in. Nothing was done. So 3 years later, he's retired now. His replacement has come in, and it's now we're past February 2023. Even by that optimistic setting, our nuclear arsenal is obsolete. And this is why the Ukrainians giving up theirs is so significant. The whole buildup, the whole idea is why is the Russian army so horrible at conventional warfare? Because they were never meant to fight a conventional war. They were meant to fight a nuclear war. So you didn't need to upgrade the tactics. You didn't need to get fancy. You didn't need to spend. First of all, they didn't have all the money to have a military as fine as ours. It would cost too much. They're too poor of a country. They can't do it. So they have a big army, a big bloated army, and everything's kind of backwards in it. But it doesn't matter because they got the great equalizer. They got the nuclear weapon. So They start out with a bunch of nuclear strikes, and what is a regiment or a brigade? What is a brigade worth that's been half hit by a nuclear bomb? You think that it's capable of resisting even a stupid Russian commander? Your worst Russian commander is going to go through it like a hot knife through butter because their morale is going to be shot. They're going to have no logistics. They're going to be half blown up. They're going to have all these people who have burn wounds.
Radiation poisoning. Yeah, no, they're fucked.
If they ground burst, they'll have radiation poisoning. But I mean, it will be really, it will be really a bad situation where a kind of clunky military that just kind of rolls through there can just kind of mop everything up. It's just a mop up army, right? Well, that's the idea. And if there's a strong point, if there's a town or city that won't surrender, just nuke it.
Hmm.
Just blow it off the map. If there's a bunker, if there's something else, just nuke it. And here you have, I mean, they had 20,000 nuclear weapons. They didn't dispose of tactical nuclear weapons at the end of the Cold War. Now we don't know how many of those still work. We don't know what they did. Peter Pry was, the former expert. He thought maybe they could all be working, or maybe it's some percentage, 10,000, 8,000 still, but we have nothing to counter that with in Europe. Our tactical nuclear arsenals there are in the hundreds. And again, there's problems with our arsenals. They haven't been tested. And have they been kept up? So we don't know. But the nuclear weapon is, Soviet military strategists have said the nuclear weapon is the decisive weapon of the next war. And their concept of this war is an all arms nuclear war. You don't just, we think of nuclear wars, you just send bombs and then the world ends. No, they send bombs and their troops come in and they invade and they occupy the territory. And it doesn't matter if some people get radiation poisoning and die, the radiation will go away in 13 to 18 days, the short-term fallout. The long-term fallout from hydrogen bombs is negligible. And we've already had plenty of the long-term fallout from the above ground dirty bomb testing in the 50s. So it's not something we haven't already coped with successfully already. So, and it's their world, and if some of it is damaged, it doesn't matter. It's my screwed up house. I own it now. I'm in charge.
Hmm.
And that's the way they view it. The Chinese and Russians both see it that way. That's the way their government systems, their strategic thought is. And the problem is that American strategy analysts for too long have not taken any of it seriously. Oh, they can't be serious. They can't mean that it's nuclear world war. I was in a room full of American experts when a Russian defector said, we trained for one mission and one mission only. For my years in the Soviet military was nuclear world war against America. That's all we
Yeah,
were
that's it.
focused on. That's it. And that makes perfect sense because look, if you're an overgrown Bulgaria and the only advantage you have are nuclear weapons, you're not going to be winning with your fancy. And why are you making hypersonic missiles, which the US doesn't even successfully have made? Because it's the first strike weapon. It can't be stopped. You want something that's guaranteed to reach the target and destroy it automatically no matter what. And it's a surprise because it happens so fast you don't have time to react. And of course, why are they infiltrating the country and seeding us with these crazy notions that there's nuclear winter, we'll all die of the cold? That's been debunked for years. I read the study on that. They had a summary at the end of the study. It's a lot of boring math and analysis, but the end of the study was, in order to create nuclear winter, you would need to make a nuclear warhead the size of the Empire State Building. It would take more than the gross domestic product of all the countries of the world put together, and you would have to go to the moon to mine the uranium because there's not enough uranium on Earth to fuel the weapon. Then you could create a hole in the Earth's crust big enough to create nuclear winter effect.
Little
Then
footnote.
you could do it. Yeah, that's a little footnote. But so all this scare, there's one more thing about Ukraine I should touch on, and I wrote about it a little bit in my last column. It is with Yuri Felchinsky, claiming that, by the way, he knew that Putin was going to move nuclear weapons into Belarus before it was announced. And so he must have had a source. And people could say, oh, they fed it to him but he says something scary. He says they're planning to use the weapons they've moved into Belarus. But here's the story. They're going to create some kind of altercation where Russian commandos made to look like Ukrainians go and capture the weapons, point guns at the heads of the people who have control over them to enter the codes to fire them at Poland and Lithuania. And then
Say
Putin could say, I didn't do it, the Ukrainians did it.
say that
And
again.
Okay, so the idea that Felczynski has is that they moved the nuclear weapons in there because they really are planning to use the nuclear weapons on
Okay.
Poland and Lithuania, that they're going to have a false flag. They're going to have Russian commandos disguised as Ukrainian
Gotcha.
partisans seize the weapons and the base and fire them at Poland and maybe Lithuania, right?
Gotcha.
That's Felczynski's. I mean, I'm just, I'm maybe
Yeah.
not doing it justice, but that's in a recent interview. This is what Felczynski said. And everybody's kind of poo-pooed it, and Felczynski is wrong. He's been fed the wrong information, whatever. I'm not so sure, because if I'm Putin, this is the kind of thing I'd be thinking of.
Hmm.
Why would I be thinking that way? I'm losing the war. I don't want to go to nukes because I don't know if NATO's nukes work. I'm screwed. So maybe I want to find out if they work. Maybe I want to apply that pressure, and maybe Europe will cut off Ukraine if they realize that it's nuclear war that can happen. But I need a plausible, deniable scenario where I can say to the Russian people, look, I didn't do this. They did it. They're trying to pick a nuclear fight with me. Because he's got to bring the Russian people with him. He's got to be the victim, right? It's like Russia. You hear the Russian propaganda. We're the victim. NATO is about to invade us. They're trying to destroy us. It's like not one NATO soldier has set foot on Russia, but the Russians have invaded Ukraine, and it's all NATO's fault. So what he does basically is, I think that this solves many problems, because if a nuclear weapon is detonated in Poland let's say at a base in Poland, maybe a supply base or something that they supply
Yeah.
Ukraine from, or maybe an air base or some military base in Poland, NATO has to respond with a nuclear strike. And Putin will say, if you want to destroy the air base in Belarus, go ahead. I understand. Retaliate. We invite you. And it's like, what if we don't, it becomes a nuclear test. What if NATO can't come up with a nuclear weapon that they feel comfortable launching? Because what if the launch fails? And what if they send a second one and it fails? What happens then? Does NATO collapse? Does the Russians find out also about the will to use on the part of NATO? And they also find out what countries in NATO might want to drop out of NATO once it becomes nuclear. No, we don't want anything. We didn't sign up for nuclear war. We're getting out. What happens then? And you know what? I look at this as a scenario and I'm thinking, well, everybody's saying Felczynski is wrong and this doesn't sound plausible. I'm thinking, that's just crazy enough to be a Russian plan. It's crazy enough. So I don't say it's going to happen, but I'm saying, maybe it's going to. I would watch for that. And that would be something that would happen during late spring or summer, maybe.
Of this
Maybe
year.
when the Ukrainians are in the midst of their offensive. If that offensive materializes, we don't know yet. And as far as Russian casualties, look, I've run through different numbers and scenarios. I think the Russians have, this is probably conservative, 150,000 dead.
Jeez.
And 100,000 wounded, missing, and whatever. That's my guess. And there's other troops that should be there that aren't, maybe desertions. Because if you look at the numbers that they have on the front, they're missing too many people. Where did they go? If they hadn't suffered those losses, they would be outnumbering the Ukrainians by large numbers by now. I think it was John Mosier, the historian, in a recent posting suggested, he says, I still think the Ukrainians are killing the Russians 5 or 6 to 1.
Wow.
And by the way, that ratio is not inconsistent with Russian history, both in World War II and the Russian Civil War and other wars like the war in Finland, the Winter War. So that's when you have a country that's institutions function the way theirs do, those are the attrition ratios you get. And we shouldn't be surprised when history repeats itself.
Just full on meat grinder.
Full on meat grinder. I mean, you've got accounts over and over again of the Russian commanders using conscripts just as loss leaders, where they go out, go run over at that. and then they see where their artillery, so they see where the Ukrainian
Oh yeah,
artillery
no,
comes in
run
and
across
wipes
the
them out,
field.
and then they fire back. And so they use them to draw fire. They use them as, that's the worst kind of cannon fodder. Whereas on the Ukrainian side, they can't afford to do that. They don't think that way about their men. And it's tragic. And so the Ukrainian losses, what are they? The Ukrainians are very quiet about them, because if the losses are too low, maybe the West won't feel like they need to give them
Hmm.
things.
Yeah, it's a fine
And if they're too high, then maybe they're too high
demoralization.
for
Yeah, the
the
people to.
demoralized Ukrainian. So the Ukrainians have a dilemma that no casualty number is the right number for everyone.
It's the fine walk of budgeting, right? Say
Yeah,
the number too high, you're not going to get it. Say it's too low, they're going to say, "Oh, the army doesn't need it." It's just a
right.
fine line
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that
It's the
Goldilocks zone.
Goldilocks problem,
Yeah.
right? You got to get it just right. And where is that? Nobody knows. Nobody wants to make that mistake. So I think the Ukrainians have very good reason for keeping these numbers secret. Wish I knew. I've heard so many different things from so many people and different analysts, but I have to say, John Mosier, as a military historian and a guy that whose judgment has proven amazing in the past, I contacted him shortly after the war started, and he called the whole thing from the beginning.
Wow.
He knew how this thing was going to go. But he wrote my favorite book on the history of the Russian front, which is Hitler versus Stalin, Death Ride, Hitler versus Stalin, which I've read like 3, 4 times because it's so darn good. There's so many lessons in it about how the Russians make war. And those lessons all apply to this one. It really is amazing. It's like taken right out of the books of history. So the Russians have the same deficits they had 80 years ago.
So what's your thesis for 2023? We seeing a nuclear strike by Russia, or we're just gonna war of attrition until next year?
I don't know. The safe bet, the safest thing is to say that people are afraid. Fear is a natural thing. Not wanting to commit suicide is a big deal, and that even trying some crazy experiment where you drop one nuclear bomb or two on NATO to see what they do is awfully dangerous,
Yeah.
and could put you in a worse doghouse than you ever were. So if you put a gun to my head and say, all right, Jeff, guess, I'm going to guess the Ukrainians will have an offensive. They'll have some success, but they won't be able to totally win. But Russia is going to go through more of a crisis, and the Russians won't use a nuclear weapon. If I had to make the prediction, I would say they won't use one. But you know, you can be surprised by these people. These people in at the head of this country, they're not normal people. But I think that in this case, that's what will happen. There will be enormous pressures within the regime for some kind of change and some kind of accommodation, because the regime, I think the economic crisis in Russia is worse than we're being told. They're painting a happy face on it, and it's not a happy face. And the Russian people are being really squeezed. It's getting more and more miserable there, and their freedom is they're going to live like North Korea.
Hmm.
This keeps going. It's going to be North Korea in their country, and China is uncomfortable with it, because China, who wanted to go, is realizing their economic vulnerability, that they can be severely damaged, that this trade thing is a two-way street, and that there may be more vulnerable. Look, China has 250% in terms of debt. 250% of gross national product is debt. They have more worse debt than we do. So we talk about us having debt. China has worse. And China has worse problems. It's ruled by communists who don't understand economics,
Hmm.
and their economy is not truly free. So without the outside help, they would collapse, and they would collapse in on themselves when they have 1.4 billion people to feed. And I think that in a panicked way, they've maybe become aware of that. And so that's what's partly saving us from World War III, because I think I had from many sources that Russia and China were thinking about, well, China especially, thinking about starting a war, a major war, and that they wanted that war to unfold, you know, actually in 2021, the Chinese were pushing, I understood, in late 2020 to start a
Hmm.
war, on the back of the pandemic. But Russia was dragging its feet. Now you see Russia's troubles. I think they realize their system, when you build a system on lies, you lie to your people and they're lying back up to you.
Hmm.
So everything is not in working order. And you've probably seen the FSB letters. You know, those letters that got leaked out to France from an
No.
FSB analyst, and he's saying, I don't think the button works. You know, I don't think the red button works the way it's supposed to. You know, he was
Oh
saying
fuck.
they all lie, they all cheat, they're all, you know, they're all stealing. It is a kleptocracy in Russia, and the military kleptocrats maybe stole 30 billions of weapons procurement money. It's why they don't have the Armada tank, and they don't have this, and they don't have that. They don't have all these spiffy weapons that they trotted out that they had developed in the late 90s. Where are those weapons? You know, and where are those motivated young men? I think they've killed a number of them off. So yeah.
My buddy Roger has a great theory that the Russians don't have functioning nukes because the tritium needs to be serviced every number of years, and it's such a small thing. And from the outside, the nukes look the same, and the only way to find out that they don't work is during World War III, which is unthinkable. Why wouldn't they be grifting? Why wouldn't they just not be servicing the tritium? Something to think about.
Yeah.
Such
Yeah.
a
Well,
small
that's the
point of
thing.
failure, and so few people would be read in on it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, nuclear weapons industries are extremely complex. It is not an easy thing to maintain. It is not an easy thing to have developed in the first place. Look at Iran trying to develop it. And the
Oh yeah,
Iranians are not stupid people by any means. The Iranians are a very able nation,
yeah.
and how difficult it is. And I don't honestly. I was told by an official of the on the sly official of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He did not by any means believe the North Koreans made their own bomb.
Really
He basically told me that the Russians
giving
gave
it
it
to
to
them.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that the
I wouldn't doubt
Russian
that.
scientists are basically are you know guiding their, and this is a way that Russia can test its nuclear weapons. They can test their nuclear weapons
Ah,
in North Korea. They get around the test.
ah.
Yeah, right. And
All
it's a North
right,
Korean test,
all
right?
right.
And maybe China's in on that game too. But because that how do they know their nukes work? Well, they have to test them somewhere.
Okay,
So
I like
yeah.
that. I like it.
So, but we'll see. I mean, yeah, it's a messed up world, and the truth matters, and we need to try to stick by it, and
Well,
do whatever we
the
can.
truth will manifest in any way. It doesn't. Water will find its level. It might take a year. It might take a century. It might take a millennia. The truth, it will. It'll come out. It's never not come out. It will. It'll always find the level. So, but to bring it back down to a very microcosm level, despite how utterly screwed it seems to be, doesn't mean that we shouldn't, walk outside and enjoy the sun, hear the birds chirping.
But by the way, can you edit out that? No, it's already live, right? It's
can
already
you
too late.
can you edit out that happy part? No,
Yeah,
man. I mean, listen, the
it's
world's on
just a
fire.
joke. I didn't mean it. It's just a joke.
But I'm also looking outside and sunny, no clouds. That's real. That's as real as anything else. Hell, it's real. It's realer than the war to me. I haven't seen a tank. Now, I'm obviously not denying that's happening, but I mean, in terms of reality, if I didn't know anything, you cut my internet access. I'm just looking outside, like, yeah, no, I see some seagulls. What's the problem?
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
Gucci.
there you go.
What are you talking
Yeah.
about? So, but yeah, Jeff, we gotta wrap this one up. I got another guest.
Okay. All
Guys,
right.
go in the description, find his books, find his Twitter, find his writings. And as you can tell, because I'm very bad at this, I think I texted you last week and I was like, did we have an episode on the books? And you're like, no. That's what happens when I don't schedule one immediately, is they just fly off into the ether in the black hole of my mind. So if you could please sometime today just shoot me a reminder text so I can remember to put one on the books. Because if I don't, I'm juggling
A,
so many guests. I can't recall anything.
a reminder for what?
Just shoot me a reminder to schedule the next episode.
Oh, okay. All
Because I
right.
think it's been a couple months since we were on. It just dawned on me last week. I was like, I haven't talked to Jeff in a
No,
while.
we scheduled one for right now, about now. We scheduled it at the time.
But I think it was only last week when I texted you.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what I mean. Is like that's what I mean is I try to schedule one so it doesn't dawn on me in August that I haven't talked to you in a while, because I like having you on. So just shoot me a reminder text. Just literally
Okay.
text me the word reminder, and I do this all the time. Trust me.
Okay. All right.
That
You bet.
there's a method to the madness. It may not appear that way, but there is.
All righty.
Jeff, love talking to you, man. You're a cool dude. Guys, go check him out. Mr. Nyquist. Till next time, man. Thank you so much. Guys, thank you for watching.